This spacemaker video is going to be looking at how you can bring in more complex geometry. So here in spacemaker I have my site and I have some geometry that I brought in before. Once it's in the beta version of the library, you've got things like area metrics, which will start to look at the square meters should you want to put that in. Once it's here though, you can place that in the model, and this one does show that it is georeference, but we can move it after placing it. And now we have that object to move around on our site as needed. And you'll notice I can also move that in the vertical direction. So this is an interesting way to bring in geometry that you maybe might not natively be able to do inside a spacemaker. But I'll show you how you can do this with the tools that you get in the AEC collections. So not everybody uses this, but this is 3ds Max. This is part of the Autodesk AEC collection. I do like to use this with iRay. Here it's got a little real-time viewer, so I can see changes happening to the model all in real time. I can also model up numerous shapes without having to be too much of an expert. So over here in the modeling tool, we have shapes, lights, cameras. We have standard primitives, so boxes and the famous 3ds Max teapot here. And we also have extended primitives here, and this will give you the opportunity to do more with different types of shape. So one we might want to look at is, say, the torus knot here, which I had before. So pretty simple, and you've got all the parameters which you can modify here just simply inside of the program. So let's say we want to bring in a couple of different shapes here. At the moment, this teapot, we could get pretty accurate about this. So at the moment, the radius is 11 meters. We can crank it up to 18. We could even crank up the segments. Now, in some cases, this may be too heavy for spacemaker. So you want to keep this reasonably light, and so you can reduce the segments. Other things you could do if you do have really complex objects is you can use the polygon optimizer to reduce the face count. So let's say you've got a model from SketchUp, from Rhino, and you want to reduce the polygon count. Here inside of 3ds Max you have the Pro Optimizer. I can click that and hit the calculate button, and this will now go crunch the numbers to reduce the vertex count. So that's at 100%. I can crank that down to 10, down to 5, and you can see it's starting to reduce information in the geometry there. So that's another little tool which you could use to prep data for spacemaker. So let's say we want to bring this in, so I'll just crank that back down to 8. I can go here and export selected. This one I'll just dump on my desktop and we'll call it teapot. I'm not going to use an FBX. I'm going to use a OBJ file, and I'm just going to leave it on the standards, and I'll do the same with this hose shape I've got here, so something that could be a tower. And again, I could crank this up to, say, 60 meters. I'll leave the segments low. This just looks at where it starts and where it ends, so maybe I could go 3 and 97. So it's a pretty easy tool to do conceptual modeling with. And we could also look at the cycles, so that's at 30, but I want to get this up to, say, 60, and we've got some different results there. So with that, I'll also export that out. Again, it's export selected, and we'll just call it tower. Export, and that has taken all that information out. So here back in spacemaker, I can go to import mesh. So I'm going to grab the teapot. Okay, so you'll see it here on the screen, and I'm just zooming back a little bit because the scale has come in kind of interesting. Down the bottom here is a grid, and this is a 10 by 10 meter grid. So it has flipped, so I'm going to move this to the y-axis, so it's now facing up the right way. And I'm going to change the scale because I think inside of 3ds Max I was working in millimeters or centimeters. I have to remember on my file unit setup. It must be in centimeters. So here I'll just make that centimeters. And now we have that teapot ready to go. So I'll hit continue. And this is now just going through and either removing information or flattening high points, flattening low points, transforming steps. I'm just going to keep this one as a mesh, so I'm going to preserve it. And we're going to continue. And now this is looking for the location of it on the site. So I'm just going to place in the center of the site. I think that will give it to me in 3D. So I'll just try that for now. And now you'll see the teapot in the library loaded into the site here. Looks like some faces maybe aren't showing. Maybe I need to convert the back faces. But it's a simple way to have that item here inside a spacemaker to have some curves in your models. Other things you could do if you want to with more advanced modeling, there's some nice little tools here inside of 3ds Max. You could look at using the modifier stack here, and there are things like the lattice tool, and this will start to do interesting things here. So let's say we want a more skeletal type structure, we could start to do stuff like that. Again, the amount of polygons could be quite high, so you could start to reduce these, but it is another way of potentially bringing data into your spacemaker environment. And I'll just overwrite that. And with that, we can start to see that inside a spacemaker. So here is that model that we brought in, and I've reduced the polygon count here, but you can see it's come in nice and clean into spacemaker, and we now have some curved geometry. So that's the workflow to bring in more detailed geometry from tools like 3ds Max, which you get inside of the collection, and you can use that inside of the spacemaker application.